Welcome to the Origin Story, an Eko-Podcast series brought to you by the Goethe-Zentrum Hyderabad and EkoGalaxy, in collaboration with Roundglass Sustain. The Origin Story is created in the hope that we live in and leave a planet that is more just, more joyful, and more diverse across lands, oceans, and species. We bring conversations with giants in the field, those who've walked the uncharted path and done right by the beautiful biodiversity of our shared planet. What were their early connections to the natural world? How did they come to be the person they are today? And what are some of the lessons for the rest of us towards building a better world? In this episode, we bring you the remarkable writer and editor Anita in conversation with India's foremost conservationist and ornithologist Dr. Asad Rahmani. And once again, thank you for your interest in our planet, biodiversity, and closely interlinked our own well-being. Thank you for listening.
Hello and welcome to this podcast. I am Anita and I run Indian Pitta Books. We are a book imprint that publishes books on birds, wildlife and natural history, and we are published by Juggernaut. Last year, we had the privilege of publishing the autobiography of Dr. Asad Rahmani, who is one of India's foremost and most well-known ornithologists. Dr. Rahmani requires very little introduction. Many of you would know that he has played a huge role in the conservation of Indian wildlife, especially birds. He was the longest-serving director of the BNHS from 1997 until his retirement in 2015. And in that period, and even from the time he started working for BNHS, much before, Dr. Rahmani worked for the conservation of many key species, including bustards and floricans, in some of our most endangered habitats like grasslands and wetlands. Along the way, he has mentored countless students and researchers. He's also a prolific writer, and over the years, he has published 26 books, 150 research papers, and over 400 popular articles on nature conservation. So it's truly a privilege to have Dr. Rahmani and to have this conversation with him on this podcast. So welcome, Dr. Rahmani.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to start by giving our audience a little peek into your personality. I think many of them would know you, but for those who don't, I have a quick rapid-fire question just for some fun. I'm going to start with the most obvious question. What's your favorite bird?
Any bird which flies and which is free is my favorite bird.
Is there a national park or a landscape that you love the most, that you've enjoyed working in the most?
Kaziranga National Park, I would say. It's one of the finest national parks of India.
Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Early bird. I get up around 4:30 in the morning, or between 4 and 4:30. Then I have a tea and then walk for 1 hour and then start working.
What do you like to do in your leisure time?
Reading and going with friends like that. I don't have many friends, particularly in Lucknow. Most of our friends are Mumbai. But I've got some wonderful friends in Lucknow also. Incidentally, today evening 3 are coming. We will have dinner and other things also.
What is the one thing that you will never leave home without?
Pen and notebook.
Final question for this rapid fire. What is your favorite accessories for bird watching and field work?
Binoculars, notebook, and pen and pencil. A couple of because I don't want to be without a pen in the field. So these are the basic necessities. And your patience, watching birds, any animal for that matter.
I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the binoculars because I want to, at this point, do a little reveal and talk about the long process that we followed for selecting the cover image of the autobiography. And those who know it, the book has a wonderful photograph of Dr. Rahmani, brilliantly taken. And although this photograph came early to us, it was among our choice picks very early on, Dr. Rahmani had a serious objection to the photograph being used because it had him wearing a camera. And he said, I've never been a camera person. So if you have to put a photo of me, I only want a photo of me with the binoculars. So then began a long chase, looking for photographs for the cover of the book. And, we couldn't find any of the old ones that worked. So Dr. Rahmani was traveling to Dudwa, he was traveling, I think, to Kashmir. So in all those places, we tried various trial photography, to see whether we could find a photo that would work for the book, but nothing really worked. The light was wrong or the angle was wrong. It just wasn't working. And, and we were nearing the publication deadline, so there were some sleepless nights over this. So finally, somebody had the bright idea of handing over this photograph with the camera to the designer and saying, can you Photoshop the camera out of the frame? And luckily, the result was excellent. Unfortunately, we couldn't do what Dr. Rahmani asked, was to reintroduce the binocular back into the frame. I think that would have pushed the designer over the edge. So we desisted from making that request. But the end result was that we had a really lovely image of Dr. Rahmani for the cover, I think, which looks fantastic and I think makes the book really eye-catching. So that's to tell you that, the binoculars are really important to him, and I think that's really how he prefers to watch his birds. Let me start by asking my first of many questions. And this is something that, that takes me back to the book. Dr. Rahmani, a public image is of a serious, focused scientist and conservationist. But in the book, you reveal that in your teenage years, you were actually an angry young man, as they say, in the Hindi movie type angry young man. And you were also a 1960s flower child. So can you tell our listeners a little bit more about that phase of your life?
I was not an angry young man, but the thing is, I was always asking questions and I was always reading, and I was sort of a rebel. And I think at the age of 15 or 16, I became atheist because I always used to ask questions for every belief. And if I'm not convinced, then they say that I don't believe on this. So I had sort of that rebellion. And I would say that every young person, now the boy or girl, should start with a sort of not rebel against the family or like that, but against the system, and ask questions and believe whatever you convince you. So that way, and then 1967, 68 to 69, when I was 17, 18 years old, that was the hippie movement. So I also grew long hair and like that because I was fascinated by them because they were also rebelling against the system. So that way I was sort of a rebel, and you can call me the maverick because that is the proper way to describe me, because I always of thinking in a new way, and that is the way. And then I also sort of a thing rebel against the system. Or my father was a judge and he wanted me to become engineer because unfortunately I got very high marks in mathematics, was not my good subject. But I rebelled and lost 1 year, and I was still, then I said that I want to study biology and I want to study wildlife. So that is a long answer to your question.
So what you're saying is that it's good to be a rebel early in life.
Yes. Even in the university, we had a group in the AMU when I was in doing MSc and PhD, and I started the conservation movement. So there also, we sort of a thing that we were telling something new, which was in the 70s, it was not sort of accepted because Shikar was a very common thing. So we had a sort of, I wouldn't say confrontation, but certainly opposition to the people who would enjoy sort of hunting or like that. And we convinced the vice chancellor, we convinced many other people that this is wrong. And then I was involved in the literary club and the drama club. I never acted because I am a terrible actor, but music club, because those are the things I would say that every youngster should do. Get involved in, beside your PhD, beside your work, we should get involved in many other activities of the university, and that is the way the character grows.
That's good advice for young people who are listening, I think. But I want to go back to a point that you spoke about. I think your interest in conservation began really early, I think, in your early college days, I think in undergraduation. And I think your own life story, as I like to say, reads like the story of India's conservation history, because you've been part of so many key institutions and you've been part of key moments in our conservation history, like when we discovered the vultures were dying and it was important to step in. The question I have is, how did it all begin? What triggered in you an interest in conservation, and was there a specific moment when you decided that it would be your career?
As I said, I also wrote in my book. My father was a judge, and he was also very fond of reading. Reading English, Urdu, Hindi, and all sorts of literature. We used to get a lot of magazines, and Statesman was a newspaper which we used to get in because he always asked us to read Statesman because it used to publish excellent English. It used to be published in wonderful English in 17. And there I read the article by Anne Krishna's, and I used to wait every fortnight the Anne Krishna's article. And that generated keen interest in me. I would say that he is sort of my guru. He is a turning point of my life. And I started, and then I studied in Hindi school in very small towns of Uttar Pradesh. So it's not, my English was not very good, but still I would like to read his writings. Then I got hold of the book over the EPG's book in 1965, I think, 64, 65. EPG's book. That was a wonderful book. And I used to dream that one day I'll also go to this place EPG had described in his book. So these two people were a turning point in my life. And then by 69 onwards, I think I got in touch with Dr. Salim Ali and Mr. Daniel in 1970. They also played a huge role in molding me to become a conservationist and to follow my passion, which was earlier. Remember, in 60s and 70s, there were only 2 or 3 jobs for intelligent or young people, that doctor bano, or you either become a doctor or engineer, or you are bright, then you go for IS job and competition. There was no other thing. If you're telling someone that I would like to become a wildlife biologist, he said, what is this? What do you do? What will you do? That sort of a thing. But I was one of the early, I wouldn't say that I am the first wildlife biologist. There were many more, Congress Whitaker, DC Chaudhary, many others are also there. But I was one of the first or early people who started wildlife biology as a career. It was only passion or just your hobby.
Yeah, others were all amateur naturalists, right? So, yeah, you mentioned Krishnan. I mean, I think he's a brilliant writer. And I think, is there any particular piece of Krishnan's that you would recommend that people read? I mean, people who haven't sampled Krishnan and you think they should, what is a piece that you'd ask them to read?
Oh, this is so difficult. I still remember an article, One Day in the Life of a Rhino. One day, only in Kaziranga, the baby rhino was there. And then next day, he found that the tiger has killed it. And it was born literally in front of him the day he was there in the field, and the next day. So that was a wonderful piece. And the way he described it, it was mesmerizing, I would say. So I remember that. And then there are many other, like of course, his title of his article were so arresting in the sense that they will compel you to read them. And he wrote for almost 45 years. 46 or 45 years. Fortnightly, he wrote nearly 2,000 articles in English, and then he was also a Tamil scholar, which I do not know the Tamil, and he was also kind of cricket, multi-faceted personality. But his articles were on nature they were wonderful, and the book has been edited by Ashish Chandola on impressions. I would recommend that book to be read by all the naturalists who are there. One more thing I would like to add here, that naturalists and wildlife biologists of Indian subcontinent should also read the Journal of the Bombay Natural History Society. I can claim that I have read almost every issue of the journal, not every case, because if there are research papers on some odonata description of one new species of lizard or odonata, it is not of my interest, in the sense that I am not a taxonomist like that. But natural history articles, I have read almost all of them. Really wonderful at that time. And they established the natural history of India, KBNHS articles.
It's a real grounding in terms of the span of years it covers and the kind of work that's been published in its pages. Very true. Your own position, I think, is so unique because I think you're a bridge between the older stalwarts like Dr. Salim Ali, Mr. J.C. Daniel, and the younger crop of biologists. I think you had the privilege of working with the great old men. And I think you, again, work with countless numbers of students, And obviously, I think you mentioned in the book as well that Dr. Salim Ali and Mr. Daniel were really important people in your life. Can you tell us something about your interactions with them and what you took away from them? What are the kind of learning or the important thing that you imbibed from your interactions with these men?
I'll start with Mr. Daniel, because he's not so well known as Dr. Salim Ali, but he was a sort of I would say he mentored me when I joined the NHS. And he was a very kind person, and too kind even to the people who do not work. He was so kind. And then he was also a very good writer. His sense of humor was wonderful. In the office, he was quite stern, and he'll come around 9:30 in the morning itself, and then he'll go whenever the work is over. But I had the privilege of going to field with him, and he was a different person there. He was joking and laughing, and he was interested in many aspects of things. Unfortunately, I would say, this is my personal view, that he didn't write as much as he could have written it. Because whatever he has written is absolutely wonderful to read because of his humor. And he mentored many of us, not many, but many of them. And whatever we are able to do later in life, I would say that it was because of Mr. Daniel as a director of the NHS at that time. And before that also, I don't remember. First time I wrote to him in 1970 or 69, 70. I don't have that letter. And within 10 days, his reply will come. He was so prompt in reply. And first I thought that because in the 60s, there were not so much work to do. But later also, when BNHS became a very vibrant 80s and 90s, and after that he became a honorary secretary when I was there. So even at that time, his letters and his replies will be, I think he will not go home without competing on everything. And that he feel that it is his job. So I learned many things from him.
Well, if I may interject, I think you're equally prompt in your correspondence. We've corresponded a lot over the last 2 years. Within 24 hours or maximum 48 hours, the reply direct to the point will be there, or there'll be some explanation for why he cannot reply. I mean, that kind of, I think you've clearly, taken that forward from him. I mean,
yes.
You can say that from interacting with you.
I should give credit to Mr. Daniel for that. So Salim Ali, when I met, he was already past 75, or he was reaching almost 80. So when I started working with him, he was at his peak at that time. So he didn't have much time with us in the sense, but he gave attention to everyone, but not so much time as he would have done it in the earlier days of his life, in the sense, or when he was 60, 70. I met him quite late in the sense, but he was also extremely meticulous in his correspondence and, replying to people, listening to people, and checking the reports and other things. We were always very afraid of sending any report to him because his English was so wonderful. That time we didn't have the chat GPT to correct our English. So he had to be. And we also learned through that process and not many people know that Dr. Salim Ali was not only interested in birds, but he was also interested in many things, politics and other things also. He was a very aware person, and he was fond of English and Persian poetry. So I stayed with him for some days when he was quite sick. And on his bed, on both the sides, there will be books of poems or text of Persian or English literature. So before sleeping, he will read that. And most of the time, his English was also excellent in the sense. Mr. Daniel told me that when he will send a draft to any magazine or something, no one dares to check it. That's a edited because it's so perfectly written. But the same thing was said regarding ambitional also. Wordings and phrases and the semicolon and colon, they were in the perfect order on the right places.
I think Dr. Salim Ali also had a famous temper, I think, right? Which I think was he much feared in the BNHS office?
When I met him, he had mellowed down. People told me, you have not seen his temper. I had mellowed down, but once or twice I had also experienced. You have to accept that. And it was maybe my mistake or what he thought that it was my mistake. I have no regret. Actually, I wish I had filmed it. Will be a sparkle. But he had a short temper. I was told because I didn't face it.
Well, then you have a two.
Yes.
That is part of his personality, so to speak, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I think from the time of Dr. Salim Ali, and I think even from your days in the field and, the early 90s, I think the ecological sciences have changed a lot. Today, a lot of the field work happens in the lab, and a lot of it is also computational, right? Is driven by statistics and analysis rather than only just pure observation. So what do you make of this shift? I mean, what is your own opinion about this?
I think we should use the latest technology, latest methodology. We should use, but there is no substitute to the field work. And unfortunately, these days I see many people who do not go to the field or who go once or twice a week or a month or like that, and then they do all their work on the computer. I call them computer biologists. No substitute. We learn so many other things also when we are working on some particular species. It is just not that focus. It is like a journal. These days, I get all the necessary papers, whichever, or people also, by digital. But when you are reading a journal in the library, so you may be interested in a particular paper, you will also see other papers. These days, the knowledge has become very focused. I call it the laser beam knowledge. It's paper more, or what we call it, the knowing more and more about less and less.
Okay.
So we have to have very broad-based knowledge of what's good knowledge of our own subject, and then the broad-based knowledge. And I can give you example of some top-class people or top-class naturalists. George Scheller. I mean, he has a vast knowledge. I mean, it's not that I have interacted with him. When Salim Ali was there, Jesse Daniel was there. Now, in a younger lot, we have Hamar Qureshi from Wildlife Institute, Dr. Chala. They are very good in statistics. But on top of that, they are extremely good in natural history. So they can interpret the data, which is the statistics, at them in a proper way. Any paper I read these days, they say this happened, this happened, this happened. I said, why? Where is why? And that they will not.
That's about joining the dots and knowing the larger picture well, right? Not just the statistics or the observations that they have made, right?
Only our own subject, we should also be aware of geography, politics, and, history of science, philosophy. All these things make you a good ornithologist or a good biologist or a good scientist or a good human being.
Yeah, and I think that is also there. I mean, it's part of the larger learning or the larger big picture analysis that people fail to make, I guess. You're so involved with the minutiae of, bits and pieces of information from here and there and not able to piece it together to create the larger picture.
That will also change, I hope so, because people will start going to the field, and there many people go. I was in WII, Wildlife Institute of India, or before that I was in BNHS, and I will go. So many of the researchers go to the field, they come back and like that. But some do not go, or something that going just once or day in a week or a month is enough for them to collect the data. And these days now, these are the camera trap. There are theses written based on the camera trap, and sometimes researchers have not even seen the animal properly in the field. Just one based on the camera. So the camera traps are a wonderful tool. That is changing the biology of research writing. But be in the field. The animal itself is a pleasure, or an animal or an ecosystem, whatever.
Yeah, I think so. I think the active observation, is still important. That's what you're saying, right? You may have passive tools like camera traps or recorders. There's no substitute for mindful, active observation. So I want to change tracks a little bit here and, talk a little bit about a topic that's, that I find very, very interesting. And it's a subject on which I did a whole anthology on women in wildlife. There are very few women in wildlife in the early days of Indian wildlife history. But now there are a whole lot of young women coming into the field in various positions, researchers, artists, designers, communicators, teachers. I think there's a lot more traction in the field for women now. But I think when you started out, there were very few women. I think there's this lovely anecdote that you relate in the book about how you would deliberately, bring women to the forefront and make it a point to show the sort of more conservative factions within AMU that, you believe that women had to be treated, equally. I think maybe you want to tell us about how you did that. I mean, I think it's an amazing story and I think you should share it.
I was in a very sort of liberal sort of a family. All my sisters were educated. Everyone, there's no difference between a male and female as far as education is concerned. So we were all very, and I am particularly very strong regarding the women's freedom, liberation, and giving, not giving, but keeping the liberty as much as possible, but equally to the male. So I was always like that. And I treated my girl students equally to the boy students. There was no difference. And when I was in BNHS director, I used to proudly say that out of the 10 departments, 6 are headed by the women. So we were always very lucky, BNHS and other places also. And unfortunately, in the 60s and 70s, there were not many women biologists. But Jamal Ara, who is, I would say that she is the first Indian women ornithologist of independent. There were some British women who were interested in the sense, but Jamal Ara, and that she did it in 50s and or the 60s, and unfortunately after that she was not very active in that. But by the 70s, women have girls have started coming to the wildlife league. And in this, WII played a very major role in my 80s, and the NHS also played a major role that there was no discrimination. The only worry which can be is just for the safety. It's not that they will not do a quality work, but we have to be slightly much more concerned about the safety. It's not a problem. One of my, I can say favorite, but one of the topmost PhD student is Faraj there. And she did such wonderful work in very remote area and university. And then in BNHS, we had Usha. Usha, I would say she's the only man in Sikkim who will fight for Usha Lachongpa. By 80s, there were a lot of women coming to the field. And Tara Gandhi is one of them. She had a very interesting team, and then she wanted to join Dr. Salim Ali, or she wanted to do under Dr. Salim Ali. Salim Ali was very concerned about her safety. And she was rejected actually at the NHS because of that. She told me, and she is also written it. But later she did wonderful work. Then we have the Priya Devidar, who did wonderful work and was in Pondicherry, a professor of Pondicherry. Anita Shah of the NHS and the Wildlife Institute of India. And she was, I would say, she was single-handedly responsible for banning diclofenac. Because she was working at the NHS, but she did wonderful work with that. And later, there's Nanbara, you have also published a book on women and wildlife.
True. I mean, but there are still although there are far more women now in relative terms compared to early years, if you look at they're still dominated by men in the field, right? There are still far fewer women than there are men. And what do you think we need to do at a systemic level to encourage more women to take to the field? Because women are capable of fantastic work, as you've related. So how do you make more of that happen?
It's a tricky question in the sense that I don't have a magic word for that. First of all, there should be no discrimination from day one in the life of a girl or a woman and person. We should encourage them to do what they wanted to do. If they want to become a wildlife biologist, then we should encourage them in our family. And if we give full freedom to a woman, she will decide what she wanted to do. As you said that there are less number of women in the wildlife field, that is common in every other field also, except possibly by teaching and the medical. Army also, there are less number of women. Engineers, there are less number of engineers. And there are many. Even if you go to the other department, there are less women. There should be, government also want at least 33% of the women. I should why 33, there should be 50%. Yes, even 33 target is not achieved in most of the department.
It's not, yeah.
So we should give full freedom.
Fair enough. I think using the choice should always be with women to do what they want to do rather than telling them that they can't do certain things. Yeah, one hopes that would be the direction, and we don't sort of box them in because we fear for their safety, because that is not the solution. I'm going to again change track to talk about some of the species that you work with. And I think the species that we all associate with you first and foremost is the great Indian bustard. And I think although there have been some positives recently in terms of the capital breeding of the species by WII and the government working in tandem, it still faces critical challenges in terms of the habitat. And the challenges that the bird faces, I think, is part of the larger challenge that most conservationists and conservation challenges in India are confronted with, which is the balance between the needs of non-human animals and the need for development engineered by humans. So there is this man-wildlife conflict in every sphere, and that is the, I think, crux of all our conservation issues. So where do you stand in this conflict? Where do your sympathies lie? Or do you think, is there even a need for a conflict? I mean, are we looking at this wrong?
Actually, you have asked 2 or 3 questions because of this. As far as bustard is concerned, there is not much conflict between human being and like that. It is a conflict between the developers and the people, conservationists. And bustard lives in the habitat, which is primary habitat, which is also used by human beings. So compared to the forest species, which are protected in the wonderful national parks and sanctuaries and tiger reserves and like that, species of the grasslands, species of the particularly short grass plains are all in danger. Bustard is just a symptom. Indian coastal is disappearing. Indian roller is disappearing. If we start working on that, any species, we find there is a decline. And they are disappearing because of various reasons, particularly because the habitat is not protected. Grassland sanctuaries. Fortunately, in 1980, the Desert National Park was created, and I must be credited to the people who decided to have this. And it was created. That's why some bustards are still surviving in the Desert National Park. And free-firing game is also part of the habitat. In both the places, the habitat is protected. Not to that extent which we want, but at least they are there. At all the places where the habitat and the larger landscape was not protected, the bustard will disappear and the florkin disappeared. Lesser florkin. Now in the Bengal florkin, which used to live in the grasslands or in the Tarai grasslands, their population has also almost disappeared. The problem is not in the national park. Problem is outside. When they go for almost 6 months, they are outside. We tracked the 5 Bengal florkins, and 1 florkin died within 6 months after hitting the wire. So how many florkins are dying after hitting the wires, we do not know, or when they are poached outside. Same thing is in bustard florkin. Lesser florkin is also dying. It was because of these reasons. And another problem is the pesticides. Pesticide is a huge issue. We just wanted to hide it in the sense that no one wants to do research on that aspect. And habitat destruction, all these multiple reasons for disappearing of these birds. And that's why I request the new researchers that instead of just going for mega vertebrates, you start working on these species, then you will also find, or may not find it, if we are not declining, that is wonderful, but most of the species will find that they are declining. Bustard is just a glamorous species, big species, that's why it is so well known. Free-ranging dogs also have become a huge problem for many ground nesting birds, particularly bustards. And in Ladakh, you see free-ranging dogs are the bigger problem for black-necked crane. So we keep on increasing the problem, and we may have decreased some issues of some problems like poaching may not be as common as it used to be because of the vigilance and because of the mobile phone also. Because mobile phone has also decreased poaching in the sense that people will take photograph and then putting some are afraid. But we have created new problems for it, like the windmills and the electric mines are now a huge problem for not only bustard, for all the birds. And WIA studying by the WIA shocking. In a study of, I think, 4,000 square kilometer area for 2 years of study, they found that between 90,000 to 100,000 birds die every year, including the larks and pipits and smaller birds. We only find bigger birds. Like just 2 days ago, my friends also were seeing us and sent pictures of the 2 vultures dying after hitting the wire. And these are known cases. We do not know how many are unknown cases.
Unknown cases. We do not find the carcasses of these birds at all, right? Yeah, they're too small.
Not a huge problem, sir. But the thing is that one of our WI scientists, particularly Sudirpo and others, it was started by Dr. Jhala, Sudirpo, they were able to raise now 68 monsters are there. And this year, I think 35 chicks were raised. And probably from next year onwards, they will start releasing some birds. Soft release first, and then they will start releasing the birds from captive raised birds, but they will be raised in a very different way, not by stock like that. They will be raised more or less like semi-wild conditions, and they will be released in the places where the bustards are already there. And this sort of experiment has been done very successfully in the case of the great bustard and few other bustards. Not only bustard, and few other species also.
So in the same sense, can we find more practical conservation strategies? Because, as you mentioned, the conflict between development and wildlife will always happen because our population has increased so much. There's a huge demand and competition for water, land, and other resources, right? So, people like Ravi Sankaran, whom you mentioned extensively in your book, who had such wonderful ideas of practical conservation, For example, this idea of allowing people to harvest the nest of edible nest reflects after the nesting season so that people would have an interest in conserving the bird, rather than covertly, harvesting nests in the middle of the breeding season. There's a real need for these kind of practical conservation strategies that will succeed despite all the challenges. So, how can we apply this more widely in India?
Would you have raised the issue of the edible nest reflect? Because that is not a typical issue. It is an atypical issue. And what Ravi has suggested was the wonderful practical way of raising or protecting it. Don't want to go into the detail, but certainly it is a long story. But it cannot be replicated for other species. For that, we need to study, we need to understand, not only study, not publishing high impact or papers in high impact journal, but we have to understand, live with the people, live with the species, and find out what are the solutions. Like, for example, I'll give you the Narcondam hornbill. It's found only in a very small island of 6.9 square kilometer. When I first heard that the Narcondam, their government has established a police colony there, I was horrified. But once I went there, then I found that the policemen are doing a job of a warden. Because if the policemen are not there, then the Burmese poacher will come. We have a free run there. So we have to see what should be done there, and what is the culture background of the people who are living here. We can't impose 100% hunting ban for every species and every place. So we have to slowly, for example, the very large number of birds are trapped. Still being trapped. One of my students has done extensive work on that, and I know. But the thing is that if you rehabilitate those trappers and give them some job, then that is the way you have to reduce the trapping. Some will always be there. But the thing is that culture change, the economic changes have also playing an important role in changing their habit. Now, most of the youngsters don't want to go and follow their tradition of trapping birds. They are most of the time busy in their mobile phones. So I guess mobile that's also played a role. Of course, you can also purchase illegal items in the mobile phone, but it has also played an important role. I'll give one more example, like the Amar Falcon case, in which I was deeply involved, and there are many other people also. That case was also a classical case. Sometimes we have to convince the people that what you are doing is wrong, totally, and it is illegal. There we cannot say that it is sustainable and you can harvest 20,000 or 5,000 Amar Palkan and that and is your tradition. When I went there, I said, I also faced the same thing. Then they say, no, this is our tradition and we have been doing it. I said, okay, tradition, do it traditionally. Don't use modern methods. As soon as you start using modern method, then it does not remain your tradition. So that sort of a shock them and then also convince them that using Japanese nest is not a tradition. So this is the way we have to convince people, and depending on, as I said, depending on the culture, depending on the habits and depending on the species, modify our conservation strategy based on.
That's, I think, solid advice for people who are in the field. And I, like you said, to tie it back to what you said earlier, these solutions will only suggest if you are a field biologist. They won't come to you in the lab if you're just running computer programs, right? So yeah, that thing takes you back to that point as well. You've mentored a lot of students, I think, and many of them have gone on to have sterling careers in wildlife research. And so what's the one piece of advice that you give all your students?
We think. Do the field work, of course, there is no compromise on that. Collecting good information, collecting and meeting people. But they have to read a lot. They also have to think. Give your time to listen every day or whatever. Maybe once a week if you are too busy like that. And meet good people, because we also learn from good people. For example of Dr. Kaustav Sharma, he one of the brightest PhD students which I had, and all others are also extremely good. But now he's the scientific advisor to the Snow Leopard project. He was mentored by Raghunandan Chindawat and Jwala. He was working in Panna. I said, you have to live with them, and he started with them. And whenever he will come to Bombay or I am go there, he said, sir, not really wonderful, they are advised. And I have learned so many things from these people. So moving with the right type of people is also very important, because we learn from our life. It's not that we have done MSc or PhD and the learning process is over. And Dr. Rohu and Rujana were working in Panna for 10 years before post-surgery, or 5 years or 6 years, whatever. So they had wonderful experience of the whole park as well as the ecosystem. So both of them were a sort of a guide, a local guide to Costa. And I would give credit to them for his wonderful PhD. And later also, and incidentally, Kaustav had come with the MSc physics background, not biology. But I still like to feel because I found him very enthusiastic.
I think such optimism is wonderful, because you need that. I mean, we live in an era when all environmental and ecological news is not, there's hardly any positive news all around, right? Every day you hear about how climate change is destroying habitats or development is destroying habitats. So, in this kind of atmosphere of gloom and doom, what do you hold on to stay positive? I mean, personally, how do you stay positive? I mean, I never seen you, bogged down by all these awful developments. But we always have something good to say at the end of it. So what keeps you positive, I think?
The secret is that I don't show my another side. Correct. Because I have also been sometimes very net down and negative on the conservation scenario which is taking place. So, and then what has taken place in the last 50 years and 55 years of my non-being. So we have lost a lot of things, but we also have gained, not gained, but at least we are maintaining. India, if you compare to the surrounding country, even in Asia, India is still a leader in conservation. And we had lost one major species, which was cheetah, that is also got back. We have to make that it is successful. We may not have hundreds of running cheetahs every year because there is no habitat left, but we are still holding on critically endangered species. We have declined almost sometimes 90% and 95%, but still. And our response, Government of India's response to the vulture crisis also was very positive, in the sense that it took us some 5 or 6 years to convince them, but once they are convinced, then they have taken steps to all sorts of steps, and they also encourage us to continue our work. So these are some positive things. We also have so many sanctioned national parks. I don't think any country will have so many national parks, and with such a huge population, 1.4 billion. So still are building on. And I have been to I have been going to some of the national parks and sanctuary, particularly the forested sanctuary, and I have not seen much change in the population or the area. Population has declined in some areas of some certain species, but there's like, for example, Dugwa National Park. I went to Dugwa in 1984, and almost 40 years, and I have not seen, as far as the area is concerned, any change in the counting or habitat. And so in some areas, the habitat has actually improved. But you cannot say for the species, some species have certainly declined, and as I said earlier, those species have declined mainly because they live in a much larger landscape. In some areas, the forest department has no control for that. So whatever they are controlling, sometimes they are not sometimes, very often they are doing a good job.
Fair enough. So I think that is enough positives to not feel totally weighed down is what you're saying. As sort of a final sort of question to you would be to say this, as amateur naturalists, as bird watchers, what can ordinary people do to help? I mean, we all feel helpless, but is there anything that we can contribute?
Either you get directly involved in conservation, which is not possible for most other people. People can help the others who are doing, like become local organizations. You help local organizations by funds or kind or your expertise or whatever way you can do it. Because that is a vicarious conservation, I would say. You are not directly, but many people cannot do it directly in the sense because they are doing different other jobs and like that. So they have but unfortunately, we do not see that sort of a funding coming or that sort of a support coming in India to the conservation. Either the conservation people are very dedicated people in that field, but general public is not so much because they are busy in their own life also, struggle for the life. But particularly the people who have some funds, who have some money, they should, help the local organization. So helping big organization is okay, but is quite glamorous. But local organizations who are working at the state level or district level, and they can also play a very important role. And particularly South India, I have seen, wherever I go to any big town will have a conservation organization, and they all struggle with their funding and like that. And they take up the job, local issues, because taking up issue of elephant or tiger or rhino or great mustard is fine. But what about your own backyard grassland which has disappeared or the wetland which is polluted? So these conservation organizations take up these issues, and I am very happy that particularly in South India, there are many organizations, not so much in North India. We have to learn from South India, particularly from Maharashtra onwards. So my take is that if you can't help it directly, help them indirectly through your resource, funds, or whatever way you can.
Well, thank you so much. I think that's a wonderful takeaway from this conversation, that how, we can contribute. It doesn't have to be theoretical. You don't have to always be covered in gloom and angst, that one can actually take positive action. I mean, there have been so many great takeaways in this conversation for me, I think, in terms of about the kind of inspiration that you took from your mentors to the kind of advice that you give young students. And I'd like to end this by sharing something that I have learned after working with you for the last 2 years, is that what I discovered is that Dr. Rahmani keeps brilliant field notes, very meticulous field notes, I think going back to the 1970s, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, he has diaries for every year that he has worked since then. And I think he makes it a point to do his diary entries very regularly. And I do know that over the last few months, he's been involved in digitizing all his field notes, which will soon be available as public archival information. And I mean, that calls for a certain amount of discipline and meticulousness, which is totally inspiring. And I think for me, that is the biggest takeaway. I mean, as busy as he is, I think he always finds time to put down his notes in his diary and to keep a record of what he's observing, who he's meeting. And I think there's no better way to learn than to reflect on, on the day gone by and what you can take out of it. I think that's really good example to follow, which I'm hoping to implement for myself. because it's a way to grow, I think, to reflect and to grow every single day. So thank you, Dr. Rahmani, I think, for answering all my many questions so patiently. I hope that you have also enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for listening to The Origin Story, brought to you by the Goethe-Zentrum Hyderabad and EkoGalaxy, in collaboration with Roundglass Sustain. Don't miss many more such incredible conversations coming up right here. Like, share, follow, and subscribe to the Goethe-Zentrum Hyderabad and EkoGalaxy. Thank you for your interest in our planet, biodiversity, and closely interlinked our own well-being. Thank you for listening.